This video is brought to you by my wonderful members and Super Chat sponsors. Click the join button to become a member. You may not be familiar with the name Manananggal, but you might have heard of its terrifying appearance. If you haven't, well, friend, you're in for one wild night. I challenge you to sleep without the grotesque form of this bizarre creature haunting your dreams. I won't spoil it for you. The following true stories come from a fellow dreamer living in the Philippines. Listen, and let me know what you think. Dear Mr. X, you can call me Anton. I'm writing you to share a series of encounters my family and I have been dealing with for many years. We live in the city of Tanjay, in the Philippines. About 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to use my vacation time from work to pay an extended visit to my brother Brian. Soon after I arrived, though, I began to question my decision. The first night I was there, my 2-year-old niece kept me awake all night, with her constant crying for her mother. It was literally 4 a.m. before she finally went quiet. I feel bad for my sister-in-law, Rebecca, most of all. At the time, she was 6 months pregnant with their second child. The second night was exactly the same as the first. I laid awake in bed for hours, with the cries of a toddler searing into my ears. The third night was when things changed. The baby was suddenly uncharacteristically quiet, but I was awakened in the middle of the night by a different sort of commotion. At some late hour, Brian, my brother, barged into the room and shook me awake. He told me his dog, a 90-kilo Rottweiler named Douglas, was fighting something in the bushes outside. The worry in his voice was enough to get me out of bed within seconds. We rushed towards the back door of the house. I could hear intense growling noises and the rustling of leaves outside. By the time we made it to the door, the bushes had gone still. Brian called out for the dog. "Douglas?" Poor Douglas emerged from the bush with a huge gash on his face. Blood dripped down off his bottom lip. I was hoping it wasn't his, but I was pretty sure it was. As we motioned for Douglas to come inside, another, more guttural growl emanated from the bushes. Brian quickly ran back to his room to grab his .45 caliber pistol. He told me he thought it might be a tiger or some other wild animal stalking our dog. He yelled out a warning before firing into the bushes. 3 shots, fired from the doorway as Douglas limped inside. I ducked into the kitchen to grab a long kitchen knife, just in case the gun didn't do the trick. The growling stopped. Rebecca called the neighbors to let them know everything was okay, figuring they probably heard the gunshots even though they were a bit far away. The next day, one of Rebecca's friends came by to spend the weekend with us. That night, as we were all going to bed, we heard the growling noise outside again. This time, it seemed to be coming from the roof. It was accompanied by the sound of scratching or pecking. The noise conjured the image of a giant bird or something like that, trying to claw its way into the house from above. My niece was acting strangely that night. She kept looking out the window with this distant stare, almost as if something was calling to her. Rebecca kept a close eye on her, noticing the strange behavior. Every time the noises erupted, Brian and I would scramble to get outside and see what was going on up there, but we couldn't see anything on the roof. As soon as we got outside, the noise would stop. However, one time was different. We got outside quickly enough to finally see what was making all the noise. In all honesty, I wish we hadn't. What we saw the last time, Brian's flashlight revealed the form of a woman perched on the roof of his house. An old, hauntingly thin woman with impossibly long forearms. Oily black hair covered her face. Blood-red eyes peered through the streaks of dingy hair. Her eyes had a deathly shallowness to them, like they were rotted. Oddly, as far as I remember, the rest of her face was somehow blurry, even as we shined the light onto it. I couldn't make out any other facial features. I didn't realize my brother had his gun until he raised it and fired a shot. The creature spun around, and we saw the twisted, mangled flesh of its lower torso. There were no hips or legs attached to the body. It also revealed huge flaps of wet, vein-covered skin attached to its back, which it seemed to use to help it glide as it hurled itself off the roof and into the trees nearby. Brian shot at it again. I didn't see the bullet hit, but I should note that my brother is literally an award-winning expert marksman. If he missed those 2 shots, I would be absolutely shocked. Rebecca's friend grabbed a shotgun, and I picked up a machete. The 3 of us went outside to make sure the abomination was gone. We saw the direction it was headed in, but we didn't want to leave Rebecca and the little one alone in the house. The next morning, a pair of police officers came to the front door, asking us what happened the night before. One of them mentioned that someone down the street had suffered a violent miscarriage. In fact, at least 5 pregnant women in our village suffered mysterious and traumatic miscarriages that year. Many of them reportedly had marks of unknown origin on their bodies for weeks prior, and also were suffering from bleeding they could not explain. The local authorities issued a warning about a suspected murderous cult knocking on random doors in the remote village areas. Apparently, they would attack anyone who answered their door. About 5 years after the incident at my brother's house, the government launched a program to allow city folks like myself to go back to their home provinces and plant food to help out during the pandemic. Of course, I went back to Tanje to do my part. One evening, around 7 or 8 p.m., I decided to go by my granduncle's place in one of the more remote villages. I wanted to make sure he was well fed, so I brought him some food I picked up from the grocery store in the city. His home is near this old Baptist church. As I passed by the church, I saw a strange young lady I didn't recognize. She was pleasant enough, though. She even smiled at me. I greeted her, saying good evening, but oddly, she did not respond. I got a strange feeling when I noticed she locked eyes with me and continued to stare, even as we walked our separate ways. I also noticed that her feet were bare, an odd choice for the rough ground we walked on. I then realized that in the time it took me to take 3 steps, she seemed to have moved about 15 to 20 steps. It was as if she was gliding along the ground, rather than walking. She kept staring at me until she was out of sight. I was already creeped out by the time I made it to my granduncle's house. Unfortunately, though, he wasn't home, so I had to start heading back to my parents'. It was getting dark, so my senses were already on high alert. I began seeing other strange things happening around me as I walked. Shadowy figures hanging in the trees, large crab-like creatures skittering about. My nerves hit their breaking point when I saw the silhouette of a hunched-over person running toward me from the darkness. The shadow had a wild mane of hair like that of a lion. When the figure crossed into the light of a street lamp, I caught a glimpse of what I could only describe as rotting flesh. The smell of cockroaches filled the air. The thing caught up to me with frightening speed. Its decrepit hand reached out desperately for my arm as I broke out into a sprint. As I began to run, I pulled a karambit blade from a necklace I wear for protection. As soon as the blade came out, the creature began moving backwards, like a rewinding tape. The sight was beyond scary to witness. I kept running until I got back to where the church was. Luckily, I saw some people outside collecting food donations, but when I got to them, they saw me running with my knife and they closed the gate to the entrance. The thing was still in the near distance, lurking in the shadows. I told myself that if it came into the light, I would attack it with my blade. It slowly began to walk toward me, its stride becoming more and more normal looking, like that of a human. By the time it reached the lit area around the church, it appeared to be just a normal woman walking and texting on a cell phone. She walked by without even looking at me, and right back into the pitch-black darkness of the night. She didn't have a flashlight or anything. I waited in front of the church gate, not wanting to find out what the hell just happened. I got lucky again when a tricycle driver passed by. I asked him for a ride back to my parents, and I had no problem paying double for the late fare. I knew as well as he did. It was stupid of me to walk alone at night, The next morning, I went to my granduncle's house, early this time, and told him what happened. He said exactly what I already knew. I was a fool to go out into the country at night alone. To this day, I feel fortunate to have survived so much crazy stuff out there in the remote village. Thanks for listening, Mr. X. Anton. Alright, what a crazy story, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It's one of the more viscerally intense accounts I've heard in a long time that have reached my inbox. I'll get into my thoughts and then we'll check out what the dreamers have to say who are listening to the live show. So, as you might remember from the last Aswang video we discussed, these things are basically the Philippines' equivalent of vampires. In that video I explained, I believe it was 5 different types of Aswang, and in the discussion portion of the video. So if you want to know more about them, I'll link to that video in the description box down below. I might even throw it in the top comment, and if I forget, which I probably will, please remind me if you can. Another one of my dear dreamers and old friends from high school, Shinfits, actually did me the favor of posting a link to a video that I said I was going to link to, but I forgot, so then he was kind enough to do it for me. So as for the experiences that Anton described, the one with, well, we'll start with the one that was on the roof. First of all, hats off to Anton, his brother, and their friend, who were gangster enough to arm themselves and go outside and try to track down a legless floating torso of some type of horrendous entity that was terrorizing them and bothering them in their house. That takes certain parts of their anatomy to be made from steel, which I will not reference, but you know what I mean. That's a very hardcore thing to do, and my hat's off to them. Especially having the presence of mind to make sure you don't go too far away from the house, because, as we all know, an Aswang typically enjoys drinking the contents of women's bellies when they're pregnant. And it could have very well been the case that it was trying to lure the protectors away from Rebecca, who was 6 months pregnant and trying to deal with another baby that was born, a 2-year-old. But she was pregnant, and that might have made her a target to that creature that was lurking around the rooftops of their house. So, with our disbelief suspended thoroughly, this could have absolutely been a case where Rebecca was the target, and the entity or the creature or the cryptid, the monster, the Manananggal, the Aswang variant, was trying to lure them away from her. If you recall, to get a few sips of that Slurpee that she was carrying around with her. That was the code word to the other video, if you remember. So that was hair-raising. So the second experience that Anton described, the one with the strange creature following him and running him down as he walked home that night, a few things came to mind. I've been in various situations where my mind was literally playing tricks on me, like where the darkness paired with a touch of fear and maybe a little paranoia mixed in, it can really warp and twist reality to fit the image of whatever we're fearing. And that it's certainly possible that the silhouette of an unexpected young woman walking down the street, especially when it's so dark, it may indeed be mistaken for that of a monstrous creature stalking you in the night. But the thing that really didn't sit well with me as far as that theory goes is the fact that she suddenly appeared differently than the weird walking gait, the stalking type of posture that it was before, with a large mane of hair on it. It does seem like it might have been possible that there was a transformation there in the shadows. This is, again, interesting stuff to talk about. Who knows what the truth really is, but it just gives me a really creepy, tingly feeling to think about, to put myself in Anton's shoes during that bizarre moment. And then again, it could have been just a badass girl who just walks the pitch black streets every night to the point where she doesn't need a flashlight and she's totally fine walking down the street on her own in the darkness. And someone who has seen weird things before in that country might have mistaken her for a monster. That could also be the case. But which one do you think it is? That is a question I will leave you with. A couple other questions I have for you are about, okay, there's one thing I wanted to mention about those cults. Do you think that the cults could have been responsible? The cult could have been responsible for some of the grisly events, the people, the women that suffered those losses around in that village over the course of that time. Do you believe there may have been something more paranormal involved? And what do you think the girl on the phone walking through the pitch darkness was? Who or what do you think she was? Let me know in the comments section down below. So now, I'll open up the floor to the dreamers listening live to weigh in. Remember, if you want a chance at your question or comment showing up in a future video, or the chance to sponsor a video with a super chat, turn on notifications or join my Discord so you can catch the live reading and discussion. So, Tariko says, I feel like most shapeshifters are said to replicate clothing as part of their appearances, but I don't always hear of them replicating objects like phones. That's a really good observation there, Tariko. If this was a shapeshifter we were dealing with in that instance, you would think having a cell phone, a glowing lit cell phone, would be a really unusual element to be produced out of thin air, unless it's just a really fashionable, high-tech shapeshifter that had a phone in its fleshy back pocket somehow, or in one of those weird wing flaps that it keeps on its back. Oh, that's such a disgusting image, thinking about that. But yeah, really good point. Good eye there, or good ear rather. Tariko also said, mentioning of the crab-like monsters reminds me of the Aswang imitating a crab in the previous story from the Philippines. Yeah, I believe that. It seems like that's a common theme in some of these Aswang stories. I've heard of crabs and crows in particular being common forms that an Aswang might take. Ambar says regarding the cell phone, modern times call for modern measures. That is absolutely correct. Ambar's on fire tonight. Ambar also said, so we are the demon's version of Balut. And I suppose so, because, yeah, I mean, it's kind of messed up. But Balut, if you haven't heard of it before, I've heard of it, I've never tried it, and I've never seen one in person, nor do I really want to. But what Balut is a Filipino, I believe it's a Filipino dish, which is basically a duck or some other type of bird egg that is boiled in broth, and it's boiled pretty much shortly before the bird would have hatched. So when you open it, there's almost fully developed bird fetus in there, and you just eat it whole, and it's pretty gnarly stuff. Technically, if you think about what the Aswang wants from a pregnant woman, minus the cooking, it is a weird, twisted version of Balut. It's a horrifyingly disgusting thought, but a salient point, I must say, Ambar. Cindy says, could have been just a trickster messing with him, but it also could be Jello or a Gello. I haven't heard of that one. A female demon that causes miscarriages and goes after children. That's an interesting point. I might have to look that one up, Cindy. Never heard of that before. Dark Phoenix says it's a Filipino horror story called Kahadlokan na Historia. Haven't heard of that before, which means a scary story in a Filipino dialect. It's about a vampire woman that comes into your house at night to feed on pregnant women by sucking the baby out from the belly button. I believe that is pretty much the Aswang in a nutshell. It uses some type of long tongue-like appendage to pierce the belly and drink the Slurpee. So Cindy's saying that the Gello is Greek mythology. Very interesting. I've always found it fascinating that so many common themes show up across cultural barriers all over the place. Very interesting stuff. Alright, so that's where I'm going to end the video today, my friends. I hope you enjoyed the stories and enjoyed the discussion. Very interesting stuff going on here tonight. So I will leave you with a code word. Alright, Ambar likes the word flesh pocket as a code word for today. Now get your mind out of the gutter before you go there. I want you to be creative. Work the word flesh pocket into your comment down below so I can see who the real dreamers are. Take it easy, my friends. See you next time. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.